We're talking with Gary Wright. He is having a concert coming up at the Eau Claire Regional Arts Center, the State Theater in Eau Claire, coming up on October 23rd, and promoting his new book, Dreamweaver, Music, Meditation, and My Friendship with George Harrison. He joins us on the phone today. Gary, welcome to the people of the Chippewa Valley over the phone.
Thank you.
And your book is you're promoting the book. You're promoting aspects of your career, and we're going to delve into that a little bit. First off, first question, have you been to western Wisconsin before? Have you ever been to the Eau Claire area by chance?
I don't think I have, no. I mean, I've been to, obviously Milwaukee and places like that, but I've never been to western Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm. Up a little bit east of the Twin Cities.
Right, okay.
And we're actually really closer. We're about 90 minutes east of Minneapolis is usually how I like to put it. We talk in terms of how many minutes we're away as opposed to miles, but
I know.
but it's a beautiful place. You're really going to like it up here when you come on by later on this month.
I bet I will. I hear it's wonderful. I think I drove into a little bit of Wisconsin when I made a trip once to Iron Mountain, Michigan, to visit a friend of mine. And I remember driving through parts of Wisconsin. We came in from Chicago. But it was very beautiful, I know that.
Mm-hmm. And you probably...
Is it the land of many cheeses, or is it the land of 1,000 lakes? I can't remember.
Well, here's the thing. Minnesota is the land of 10,000 lakes, and we're known for our cheese, but Wisconsin actually has more lakes than Minnesota. So you really get them both when you go through this state.
Yeah.
You're going to find it really beautiful here, so yeah, definitely enjoy when you come by. Your particular show, as I understand, and fill in the details on this, I believe you have an accompanist, a pianist with you, I believe. Are you also playing keyboard, playing synthesizer, or are you just singing? And then, of course, with their stories as well. Kind of describe the show.
Well, the show is actually... I do about half of the songs just with my keyboard player, my piano player. The other half I do to backing tracks that I created in my studio. And then there's 2 readings that I do throughout the show for my new book. And there's a slideshow which has rare, never before seen photos of myself, some with George Harrison and Ringo, and just some cool shots that I think people would like to see.
This book, you mentioned George Harrison in the title of the book, and it seems an appropriate time for this to be coming out, with the recent release of the Apple Years box set of George Harrison's first solo albums, and of course you were part of some of that work as well. Describe, and maybe this is part of what's in the book. How did you get to work with George Harrison? I believe maybe Klaus Voormann had part of this to do, but how did this all happen?
Yeah, it happened through Klaus, because Klaus and George were very close, and I was producing at the time. That's after I left the band I was in, Spooky Tooth, and I was working with producer Jimmy Miller, who would produce Traffic, Spooky Tooth, and just got the job for doing the Stones. I was in the studio producing an artist for one of his projects he was working on, and I got a phone call from Klaus saying, I'm in the studio with George Harrison, and he's doing his new album. Phil Spector is producing. They need an extra keyboard player. Can you come right away? And I said, of course, I'll do that. And I jumped in my car and drove over and was blown away when I walked into the studio. There was Ringo and Eric Clapton and Billy Preston and a whole bunch of great musicians. I felt in awe.
How many tracks in the album? And I suppose I could just take a look at the liner notes and probably get the answer right there. But for anyone curious, any particular parts on any of the tracks in that album that really stand out as one of your keyboard parts?
I played on the entire album. I played keyboards.
Nice.
And on all his future albums, I played on every one of his albums. I think with the exception of Gone Tropo.
The one from '82, but yeah, in fact, I saw you had elements going even into the late '80s, getting up to Cloud 9 and some of those works. Tell me from the time you worked with George Harrison, are there any particular stories? And again, maybe this is stuff in the book, so maybe you should just say read the book and find out. But are there any, shall we say, unique stories or things that people wouldn't have suspected of your time working with George Harrison?
Well, George had a great sense of humor. And I remember this one time we went out to go to this sushi bar that he quite often liked to visit. And we had a great meal, and we were in the parking lot going to our car, and he pointed to this blue, old, really beat-up pickup truck with these old smashed-in doors. And he looked at me and said, "Do you want to go with me, or should you want to take your car?"
Very nice.
It's hilarious.
He had a unique sense of humor. That's for sure. We're talking with Gary Wright here, ahead of his performance on October 23rd at the Eau Claire Regional Arts Center in Eau Claire. We're talking especially about your time with George Harrison, from your autobiography out, Dreamweaver, Music Meditation, and my friendship with George Harrison. What was the biggest lesson, or plural perhaps, biggest lessons that you learned from George from all the years that you associated with him?
George was a very peaceful person, and he was a very, very deeply spiritual person. And initially, I was drawn to him, I think, because of his interest in Eastern philosophy, which I was interested in as well, but I didn't know any of the books or anything like that. And when I first met him, I could sense that immediately, that this is somebody that's different than other people that I've met. And he became my mentor. He picked up on the fact that I was interested in these things, and he gave me books, and gave me incense and pointed me towards certain authors, the main one of which was Paramahansa Yogananda, who later on in my life became my guru. And so he also gave me a book that was the inspiration for the song Dreamweaver that I wrote. There was a book of poetry called Songs of the Soul, and one of the poems in it was called God, God, God. And one of the lines in one of the verses went, "When at night my mind weaves dreams with threads of sacred memories, on that magic cloth do I emboss the words God, God, God." And I looked at that again and again, and I took out my writing journal where I had all song titles, and I wrote the words Dreamweaver down. And so that was the genesis of how that song came about. But George was very kind to me. He helped me in my career. He asked me to appear with him on the Dick Cavett Show, and he was really, really a wonderful friend. That's all I can say. He's just very deep, very kind, very compassionate, a brilliant artist, not only in his music, but the way he designed his gardens and his home, and the different rooms, the paint colors he used, and all that were just amazing.
Many ways to check it out. All of his music prior, of course, I mentioned the recently released box set, and your music that, as you just inferred, it inspired from the lessons you learned from George Harrison. Let's talk about the Dreamweaver, and as I understand, that's being digitally re-released right about now. That album.
Yes.
How much of that album, we mentioned Dreamweaver, the song, but the entire album, The Dreamweaver, how much of that was inspired from like the book and the teachings, and what was the whole inspiration of that album in terms of lyrical content?
Well, I think the lyrical content, a lot of that was out of the books that I had read, through my friendship with George. Most of the Dreamweaver albums, I think, was written probably in from 1974 and 1975, which is when I recorded the album. And so that was when I wrote the album, I didn't intend it to be an all-keyboard album, because my background really in music at that time was Spooky Tooth, which was really a guitar-heavy oriented band. And so when I wrote the album and when I was making, the arrangements, putting them all together, I had all my keyboard instruments, like a Hohner clavinet and a Fender Rhodes and a Hammond organ and a rhythm ace, a little rhythm machine. And I wrote all the songs using these devices, thinking that, I'll put guitars on. But then as time went on, I started to like the way they sounded without guitars, and I decided to leave it like that. And it worked in my favor, because all the radio stations, when they heard it, they said, "And this is Dreamweaver, and it has no guitars on it." And so it worked in my favor, and then a lot of people started to use synthesizers on their albums, especially mini mode bass, which I kind of pioneered the usage of. I say that with all humility, but it is true. I did use that on this album, and then after that, a lot of groups started using keyboard bass, and now you hear it everywhere.
Mm-hmm. on that.
Kind of like,
oh, go ahead.
Yeah, that was a little bit of the story how Dreamweaver came together.
And on the title track, on Dreamweaver itself, and mentioning all the synthesizers, and I that song has fascinated me my entire life. When I was a really young kid, was just after that song came out, was then I started hearing it on the radio, and the myriad of sound effects you get out of that, out of the analog synths from that time. I'm curious, do you remember which synthesizers you used to especially get kind of I almost want to call it a seagull effect, kind of the fluttering sounds in that. I mean, I can hear the Fender Rhodes underneath, I hear the synth pads, but then there's kind of those celestial sounds that'll be fluttering at the beginning and a little bit here and there. Which one, do you remember which one you used?
I do. It was all done on the Mini Moog.
Oh.
I had a Mini Moog, which I had bought just before I left Spooky Tooth. And the bass, I played the bass with it using that, and also it's called tinkling bells, those little electronic sounds that are used at the beginning and the ending of Dreamweaver and interspersed throughout the song. And I ran them through a delay as well, an Echoplex, just to give it a little bit of sound texture. So, yeah, that was it. It was the Mini Moog that I used most of. And then the ARP string ensemble, I played the string lines using that. And David Foster played the Fender Rhodes piano part, and Jim Keltner was on drums.
Fascinating, absolutely interesting. I've always wondered that, and now I know. That's awesome. We're talking with Gary Wright, ahead of his performance October 23rd in Eau Claire, promoting Dreamweaver, music, meditation, and my friendship with George Harrison. We've mentioned Spooky Tooth before a little bit. Describe for the listener how you got involved with that band, and there's some other connections in that band and some of your musical projects between that and the Dreamweaver, where you were involved with some other artists that went on to have connections with Wings, with Mick Jones. Kind of describe how did Spooky Tooth come together?
Spooky Tooth came together when I met Chris Blackwell, who was the president of Island Records, who had just signed Traffic to his label. That was like late '67, and he saw me perform in a band I was with in Norway and asked me to come to England, and he put me together with these 4 other musicians, and I came up with the name Spooky Tooth, and then we started a tour and did our first album that Jimmy Miller produced, and our second one called Spooky 2, which is probably the most successful Spooky Tooth album that was done. And then we did another album, which really wasn't our album, it's called Ceremony. And when the band split up shortly after that, and it reincarnated again, but with some more minor success, not incredible big success. And but out of Spooky Tooth, Greg Ridley joined Humble Pie. He was the bass player. Luther Grosvenor, our guitarist, joined Mott the Hoople. He changed his name to Ariel Bender. And Mick Jones, the other guitar player who was late, it was after Luther, formed Foreigner. And then I had my own solo career as well.
Almost a kind of, in a roundabout way, kind of a super group of sorts before and go on to the other bands. That's absolutely interesting. Of all of the songs you performed over the years, all of your solo work, maybe work with collaborative work, what are maybe your more favorite songs that maybe don't get as much attention? Or in general, what are your favorite tunes that you have recorded and written over the years?
Oh, there were some of them. Oh, let's see. I mean, on my last album that I've released, which was called Connected, there's a couple of really great tracks that I liked. One was called Can't Find No Mercy. Another was called Give Me Some Time. Another song I wrote for my granddaughter called Kira Lane. And then on another album I did called Who I Am, there was a song called Who I Am and Sad Eyes. So these are all on previous albums I did. And on Spooky 2, on Spooky 2, I liked Hangman Hang My Shell. That was a great track.
You also performed a few years earlier with Ringo Starr and his all-star band. Describe years that describe collaborations and just associating with Ringo Starr over the years.
Well, I met Ringo when I played on his first 2 singles that George produced, It Don't Come Easy and Back Off Boogaloo. So we had known each other from the very beginning, from having worked together on All Things Must Pass right through all of George's albums that he played on. And Ringo is great. We've always been friends, and we just kind of like lost touch with one another during the 80s and 90s. And then I got a call asking me if I wanted to join the All-Star Band. And I said, sure, I'd love to, because he's such a great person. He's a great drummer. And I did 4 tours with him, and it was a fabulous experience.
Briefly on the subject of meditation here, before we wrap up, I've tried meditation myself a little bit. I'm getting more into that as the years go along. What have you found as an effective approach to meditation over the years? What are some of the influences and lessons you've learned in meditation?
Well, as I mentioned to you earlier, I found George kind of like introduced me through literature to my guru, Paramahansa Yogananda, and I follow his spiritual path. And what's unique about his path is that he gives techniques to meditate. It's very, very hard to just sit down in a chair or on the floor or whatever and to try and make your mind quiet down, because the mind can't control the mind. Mm-hmm. And he gives techniques to use, watching the breath, and there's a mantra, and chanting Om, and then there's this other technique, which is the most highly advanced spiritual technique, where you get inside your spine and you actually control the life force. And the thing is about these techniques is that they calm the restless mind, and when the mind is calm, the breath slows down, and when the breath slows down, the heart rate slows down, and you get into these deeper, peaceful states of consciousness, where then you start to experience yourself not as the ego and as the nervous individual who kind of fumbles through life, as the soul. Kind of like the analogy would be like the moon reflecting on a pond or a lake with no wind has a beautiful image, but when the restlessness of the wind comes in, then the moon becomes distorted. And it's kind of like that analogy in meditation. When you're restless and nervous, you can't get to that place. That's why you need techniques to take you there.
Fascinating, and there's much more to read in the book. By the way, after this tour, October 23rd is the show in Eau Claire, and there's a lot that's coming out between the book, between the digital re-releases, greatest hits package. What's going to be your next project?
I don't know. I really don't know. I might write another book, or I might do another album. I'm not sure yet until I see what happens with the book.
Either way, there's going to be something fascinating coming. Thank you so very much for talking with us, Gary Wright. We'll be giving away tickets to the show, and have fun with your show October 23rd.
Thank you so much. Nice talking with you.